I'll never forget that day. We were advancing slowly, stumbling through the smoke, the ground trembling after hours of bombardment. The hill in front of us seemed lifeless, just churned up earth, craters, and the smell of burnt things. Everyone thought the worst was over. All we had to do was climb, reach the top, and reinforce our position. At least that's what the command said. But deep down, everyone knew that in war, what seems simple always hides something wrong. The silence was too strange. No gunshots, no screams, nothing. Just the wind hitting helmets and raising dust. It was the kind of silence that makes your stomach churn, the kind that makes any soldier look around expecting something to explode. And in the middle of it all was him, our dog, a strong, resilient mutt who had already been through things that many soldiers wouldn't endure. He always went ahead, sniffing the way, alert to any movement. But that day, something about him changed. When we reached the base of the hill, he simply froze. He stopped out of nowhere. He looked up as if he saw someone up there, but there was no one. None of the soldiers understood. We tried calling him, pulling on his leash, gently pushing him. Nothing made him move. He stood there, growling softly, his body stiff, his tail tucked in, and his eyes fixed on a specific point. That's when people started whispering, "Something's wrong." He's never done this before. If even the dog is scared, imagine what's down there. But the commander didn't have time for fear of a dog. He ordered them to proceed, leaving the animal behind if necessary. And that's precisely when things started to get really strange. The dog not only froze, it turned around, ran in front of the soldiers, and began blocking the path as if it wanted to prevent the climb at all costs. It barked, pushed, dug, went back, barked again. It was as if it were trying to warn them of something. It wasn't fussiness, it wasn't fear, it was desperation. We didn't know it yet, but that behavior would have prevented a tragedy so great that even today it's hard to believe. Because what was buried there, right under the spot where the troops were about to step, wasn't just an ordinary trap. It was something that would have wiped everyone out at once without any chance of reaction. And the worst part, it seemed designed precisely to catch a group like ours at the moment when they believed the path was clear. What happened after that, what the dog found and how that turned the battle upside down, still gives people goosebumps to this day, because nobody imagined that an animal alone would be able to see what none of us saw, and if he hadn't stopped at that exact second, you probably would never have heard this story. And I guarantee you the reason that dog froze will surprise you. It wasn't fear, it wasn't pain, it wasn't survival instinct. It was something else, something that no soldier noticed, and that saved everyone up there. Would you risk climbing that hill even after seeing a dog frozen like that? Before I continue this story and reveal what was really hidden up there, subscribe to the channel, leave a like to support it, and comment below what city you're watching from. This helps a lot and makes this story reach more people who enjoy this kind of tense and twist-filled tale. Want to know what the dog found? Then come with me. We had seen many places destroyed in the war, but nothing compared to that hill. It was as if someone had ripped an entire chunk of land from it and thrown it back haphazardly. Everything was crooked, broken, and smouldering. With each step, the ground sank with a dry thud, as if we were stepping on bones mixed with mud. The dust clung to our throats. The smell was of burnt metal, old gunpowder, and something else I preferred not to identify. The command had said that the key to keeping the line secure was up there. So it wasn't a matter of choice. Either we went up or we left. Space for the enemy to push everyone back. But when we reached the base of the hill, the feeling was different. It didn't seem like a mission. It seemed like a trap. No sound, no shadows moving, no stray bullets cutting through the air. Nothing. And when silence becomes too prevalent in war, believe me, it's not peace, it's a warning. The platoon was tired but alert. They looked at each other, trying to guess who would be the first to climb. The ground was full of recent craters, some still, releasing hot steam. The earth trembled occasionally from distant explosions. It was the kind of scene where anyone would think twice before taking the next step. But that day had something more, something we only understood later. And that's when the dog, the mongrel who always went ahead and never showed fear, began to show signs that something was wrong. He walked, sniffed, retreated, advanced again, as if he were trying to put together pieces of a puzzle that only he could see. I observed every detail because in that environment, Even a mosquito could become an enemy. The dog stopped suddenly, as if it had hit an invisible wall. Its body stiffened, the fur on its back stood on end, and it let out a low growl, the kind you feel in your chest, not your ear. The people in front looked back at the same time. That was the kind of behavior you can't ignore, especially coming from an animal that had already survived bombings, gunfire, and entire nights in the mud. But the commander didn't want to waste time. He thought it was just tiredness, maybe stress for the dog, and ordered them to continue. But the atmosphere changed. The troops became restless. Two soldiers exchanged glances, as if they had understood something the leader hadn't seen. The dog took a step back, then another, and began barking upwards, right in the direction of the path that led to the top. It wasn't an ordinary bark. It was as if it were trying to stop us from doing something stupid. The commander tried to assert his authority, saying that no one was going to stop because of a nervous dog. But then the impossible happened. The mongrel ran ahead of the group and simply blocked the path. He barked loudly, shoved a soldier with his paws, then went back and started digging in a patch of earth that looked like any other. Except there, the sound was different. It was hollower, more empty. Nobody wanted to admit it out loud, but everyone noticed. He wasn't digging for nothing. He was digging because there was something there, right there, waiting for us to make a wrong move. The tension grew quickly. I felt the sweat running down my back, even with the cold cutting through the air. Everyone stood still, staring at the dog, trying to understand what it was trying to show. The entire platoon, armed, trained, prepared to face enemies of flesh and blood, stopped because of an animal that seemed to hear something we couldn't. One of the soldiers approached slowly, knelt down, and I tried to brush away some of the dirt with his hands. He barely touched it with his finger, and it turned as white as paper. He called to the commander, his voice trembling, and when he finally saw what was under that thin layer of earth, the world seemed to stop. Up until then, nobody knew the magnitude of the problem. Nobody had any idea what was about to happen if the dog hadn't stopped like that. But that first sign, that sudden stop, that growl, that blockage, was exactly what prevented the troop from heading straight for what would have been the worst tragedy of the operation. And at that moment, looking at the trembling but firm dog, staring at us as if to say, "Don't go any further," I understood that something very wrong was buried beneath our feet, and that he had sensed it before anyone else. But what exactly was there? How did it end up in that exact spot? And why did only the dog notice it immediately when dozens of trained soldiers saw nothing? The commander descended the hill with heavy steps, irritated that the advance had stopped because of a dog. He didn't want to believe that this was something serious. But when he saw the soldier kneeling, pale, his hand trembling on the churned earth, his expression changed instantly. No one needed to explain anything. It was enough to look at the way the dog stood, rigid, its breathing rapid, its eyes fixed on the hole it had dug itself. It was as if the animal were saying, "Look here, now you understand?" The commander slowly bent down and moved a little further away from the ground. It was in that second that he held his breath. The scene was clear, a thin, taut metal wire attached to some mechanism buried deeper. It wasn't rubble, it wasn't a stray cable, it was a detonator, and a big one. The soldiers took 2 steps back at the same time, as if one were instinctively pulling the other. No one spoke, but they all thought the same thing. We almost stepped on that. That trail, which seemed safe, had been carefully laid to trap any group that tried to climb without caution. The trap wasn't there by chance. It had been planted exactly where the terrain forced the group to line up to continue the climb. One wrong step, and goodbye. But what made the troops most nervous wasn't the trap itself. It was the dog. He not only saw the threat first, he understood before everyone else that the area was deadly. And it wasn't the smell of gunpowder, because the mine was buried deep. It wasn't the sound, because as far as we knew, everything was silent. It was something more, a perception that none of us could explain at that moment. The dog began pacing in short circles, staring at the hill as if tracking something invisible. Each of its movements left the soldiers even more frozen in place. We realized it wasn't just a mine, it wasn't just a wire, it was an entire system, and the animal was trying to show that this wasn't the end of the danger, it was only the beginning. The sergeant approached the commander and spoke in a whisper. "If this is what I'm thinking, the whole hill might be mined." The phrase hit everyone hard. The commander swallowed hard, called the warden, and the atmosphere shifted from silent panic to a delicate operation. No soldier took another step without looking where the dog was pointing. It went from side to side, sniffing, stopping, staring at specific points in the terrain. And every place it looked made the warden's eyes widen. The dog was literally mapping out the entire trap. And then came the biggest surprise. 3 meters to the side of the first discovery, the dog froze again. He turned slowly, sniffed the ground, and sat down. That's all. He sat down. Anyone who had wrestled with him before knew. When the dog sat like that, it meant there was something big there. And again the sound of the floor under his boots confirmed what no one wanted to admit. It was another hollow space, another mine, another detonator, another chance for everyone to turn to dust. The craftsman began to sweat profusely, even with the icy morning air cutting his face. He cleaned the second area, and more wire appeared, but now there was a new detail. The cable was connected to a deeper wooden box, probably a synchronized explosion system. That is, if one was triggered, they would all go down together. It was a death circuit. The commander knelt on the ground, placed his hand on his helmet, and let out a heavy sigh. For the first time since the start of the mission, he seemed genuinely frightened. "If we had gone up," he said without finishing the sentence. His silence said it all. That's when the dog took a few steps up the hill, stopped and looked back, as if to say, "It's not over yet." The commander, now completely devoid of pride, shouted, "Follow the dog." No one laughed. No one questioned it. It was serious. It was life or death. And at that moment, the animal became the official guide of the operation. The soldiers began to climb slowly, following exactly the path the dog indicated. One step off the mark, no one dared risk, and the higher we climbed, the clearer it became. The enemy had planned this with precision. Every narrow point of the trail had a mine, every curve, a trap, every flat area connected detonators. The hill was a complete minefield, but organized on the German side like a deadly jigsaw puzzle. And as the tension increased, the dog seemed even more alert. He would stop, sniff, move forward again, change course, when necessary. It was as if he were seeing a map that no one else could see. The commander looked at him as if he were looking at the only soldier there who truly understood what was happening. When we finally reached the halfway point of the climb, the dog stopped again. But this time it didn't bark, didn't dig, didn't push anyone. It simply stood motionless, staring at the summit. The soldiers behind me froze. "What is it now?" someone asked. The dog took 2 steps back. That's all. But it was enough. The craftsman bent down there and even before touching the ground realized that spot was perfectly clean. 2 loose soil. Sand placed on top only to disguise it. It was a marked location, a prepared spot, a larger, deeper mine, probably with more material. And then came the most terrifying confirmation of the day. That mine wasn't supposed to block the climb. It was supposed to explode when the peloton was at the top. In other words, the objective was not to kill soldiers along the way. The plan was to eliminate them all at once up there when they were all together. It was in that second that the commander understood why the dog had frozen down there. The enemy hadn't just set traps. They had prepared the hill as a final trap, something that would only be triggered at the right moment. And the dog was the only one who sensed it before everyone else. What we didn't yet know was that the top of the hill hid something far worse, and that the final reason, the one that explained why the dog froze at the very first step of the climb, was yet to come. With each new meter we climbed, it became clear that no one there had understood the magnitude of the problem when they arrived. The entire hill was a giant trap, planned with time, patience, and cruelty. But what most disturbed the troops wasn't the danger. It was the fact that only the dog had noticed everything from the beginning. He stopped before each mine, avoided each wire, changed course when the terrain seemed too normal. It was as if he were seeing the enemy without seeing a single German soldier. As we got closer to the top, the atmosphere became heavy in a different way. It wasn't just fear of mine anymore. It was that feeling that something was waiting for us up there. The dog started walking slower, its body glued to the ground, sniffing the air as if trying to identify some specific scent. It growled softly, as if conversing with the wind, and suddenly froze again. But this time it wasn't. The same reaction as before. It was worse. He didn't dig, he didn't bark. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on a point we couldn't see. His breathing became short and rapid. A soldier tried to pass by him, and the dog lunged forward, baring his teeth, something he had never done before. The entire troop froze. If that animal, which had already endured the worst bombardments with us, was acting like that, it was because the danger there was extraordinary. The commander signaled for everyone to get down. The silence was so profound that you could hear your own breathing echoing inside your helmet. The craftsman crawled over to the dog, trying to understand what he had found this time. He began to carefully run his hand over the ground, slowly brushing away the dust. One touch, one single movement, was all it took for his face to transform. "Commander," he whispered, "this place is a real gem." Nobody understood at first. He explained quickly, "It's not just a mine, it's a major cargo. If it explodes, it takes half the hill with it." The ground looked normal, soft, loose, as if someone had just disturbed it. The craftsman removed more earth and a metal lid appeared, rusty but intact. When he pushed it back a little further, he could see what was underneath. A complex mechanism with wires extending to other parts of the terrain. The thing was much bigger than we imagined. That charge was the central piece of the circuit. If it were detonated, all the other mines would be triggered at the same time. It was an explosion planned for a mass massacre. And then came the most frightening detail. This main load wasn't activated by pressure like the others. It was activated by a signal, a wire pulled directly to the top of the hill. In other words, someone at some point planned to activate everything remotely. The commander turned pale. They were waiting for us to get up there. That's when it dawned on everyone. The hill wasn't just a minefield, it was a stage. The enemy's plan was to let the soldiers climb up, believe they had taken the top, gather everyone there, and then blow everything up with a single blow. It would be quick. It would be definitive. It would be the kind of story that ends with dozens of bodies buried alive, with no chance of defense. And then it all made sense. The dog hadn't froze because of a mine. He froze because he sensed the whole thing. The entire hill smelled of death. Maybe he heard vibrations. Maybe he smelled metal. Maybe he sensed electricity in the air. Nobody knows. But the fact is, he understood before everyone else that the summit was a final trap. Meanwhile, the sergeant watched the wire rising up the terrain. "That wire goes all the way up there. We need to see what's up there," he said. Nobody wanted to go up. It was like entering a room knowing there was someone hiding behind the door waiting to get you. But the mission had to continue, and if that wire was connected to someone or something, we needed to find out. The commander took a deep breath and said, "Let's go." But nobody takes a step without looking where the dog is stepping. He's our guide now. The dog advanced a few more meters, always avoiding the most suspicious spots. The platoon followed behind, each with their heart in their throat, knowing that any mistake could be their last. At the top of the hill, the situation became clearer. Torn sandbags, burnt pieces of wood, remnants of makeshift trenches. It seemed abandoned, or so it seemed. The dog stopped near a piece of dirty tarp, raised its snout and growled as if it saw someone inside. Two soldiers approached slowly and lifted the tarp with the tip of their rifles. It was at that moment that the unexpected revelation came. The tarp concealed a small metal box. It wasn't ammunition. It wasn't food. It was a transmitter, a remote detonator, an improvised but efficient device. The kind of thing someone would use to send a signal and blow everything up down there with a single command. There was just one problem. The enemy who was supposed to trigger it wasn't there. The seat was empty, completely empty, but the equipment was charged, working, and connected directly to the main power source downstairs. The sergeant took a deep breath and said, "If someone had gotten here before us, we wouldn't be alive anymore." The commander didn't answer. He was looking at the dog, which remained still, staring at the horizon as if searching for the one truly responsible for all of this. We didn't know it yet, but the scariest part wasn't the trap, the detonator, or the main charge. The scariest thing was who I had prepared that, and because he had left the abandoned position as if he were planning to return at any moment. And it was precisely this someone that the dog sniffed out first, even before any soldier noticed. When the sergeant opened the metal box with the tip of his bayonet, everyone flinched a little. It was the kind of object you expect to explode, even if no one actually touched it. But the lid opened with a faint creak, and what we saw inside made our stomachs churn. Tangled wires, an improvised battery, a selector switch, transmitters, all assembled by hand, but with enough precision to make it clear that whoever had put it together knew exactly what they were doing. "This isn't recruit work," the craftsman said, without taking his eyes off the mechanism. "This is specialist work." But then came the part that put the group on high. Alert! The box wasn't covered in old dirt. The dust inside was fresh. The tarp covering it was only damp on the surface, not at the bottom. In other words, someone had tampered with it. A short time ago, perhaps hours, perhaps minutes before our arrival. The hill might have been silent, but it hadn't been deserted for days. Someone was there, or nearby, or watching. The dog began pacing in short circles, sniffing the air as if trying to find a specific trail. He would raise his snout, take a deep breath, then take a few quick steps toward the sparse undergrowth that surrounded part of the hilltop. His body was stiff, tense, prepared. It was as if he knew that something alive was there, hidden. The commander raised his arm and gestured for a defensive position. "The enemy may be nearby. Everyone be alert." The troops took their positions, positioning weapons, choosing cover, scanning every corner of the hill. But the dog was faster. He made a sudden dash and ran toward a pile of destroyed sandbags, throwing his body forward with all his might. His bark cut through the silence like a knife. A loud, aggressive bark, not meant to attract attention, it was meant to intimidate. On the other side, something moved. A dry sound, a quick drag, enough for several soldiers to aim at the same spot. "There's someone over there!" shouted one of the men. Tension exploded. One soldier advanced along the side, another covered the rear. The sergeant pulled up the torn tarp that had fallen behind. The sandbags. And that's when the shock came. There were recent boot prints deep in the earth, 2, 3, maybe 4 footprints, all pointing toward the west side of the hill where the vegetation was denser. The enemy was there, or had been there minutes before, or worse, was still watching. The commander approached the edge of the hill and looked down at the valley behind the summit. The dog stayed beside him, its body pressed against the ground, growling at the bushes. And then we saw it. Down below among the trees there was movement. No faces or complete uniforms were visible, but shadows were. Someone was retreating, not running desperately, retreating calmly, as if knowing they had accomplished their mission. "They saw us arrive," the commander murmured, clenching his fist. "And they know we've found out everything." The dog took a step forward and barked again, pointing with its body in the exact direction of the escape. He wanted to go after them. He wanted to finish what he started. But at that moment the troop had a bigger problem than chasing the enemy. The entire hill was still armed, and the detonator was there, ready to be triggered by any madman who decided to go back and press the button. The sergeant, still crouched beside the transmitter, extended his hand. "Commander, we need to deactivate this before anything else. If anyone activates it, it's all over." The commander hesitated for a few seconds, looking at the bushes, at the escaping enemy, and then at the dog, which kept its eyes fixed in that direction. "First disarm them. Then we hunt down whoever did this." The craftsman set to work immediately. He opened the box more carefully, followed the wires, traced the connections, studied the mechanism as if he were reading a book written in explosives. Every movement he made left everyone with their hearts in their throats. One mistake, one wrong wire, one misplaced touch, and no one there would survive. The dog wouldn't leave the transmitter. He kept his snout close but without touching it, watching, as if he understood that this was the critical point, as if he knew that any noise, any sudden movement could change everything. After long minutes, which seemed like hours, the craftsman raised his eyes. "Commander, this was designed to explode remotely, but it also has a delay mechanism." "Retarded?" asked the sergeant. "Yes, even if the signal is cut, there's a hidden timer here. If the guy activated it before fleeing, it's already counting down." The phrase sent shivers down everyone's spine. "And how long will it take?" the commander asked. The craftsman grimaced. "It's hard to know, but if he set the trap before running, the clock has been ticking for a long time now." The commander looked at the bushes again. So whoever set this up wasn't running away. "So what?" a soldier asked. He was stepping away to wait for the explosion. The dog barked loudly at that exact second, as if confirming the theory. The sergeant cleared. "The way for the craftsman. Can it be disarmed?" "Okay, if I can cut the right wire before the mechanism in here jams." The atmosphere became unbearable. The wind whipped against the canvas, dust rose and fell, and the soldiers breathed slowly so as not to disturb anything. Every second felt like their last. The dog for the first time took a step back, as if sensing that this moment was more delicate than all the others before. When the craftsman cut the first thread, everyone held their breath. The dog lowered its ears. When he cut the second one, the box made a sharp crack, the third one nothing, and then he said, "There's only one left, and if I get it wrong, it's all over." The commander approached, sweating, his face tense. "Do you know which one is correct?" The craftsman looked inside. "I think I know, but I think doesn't mean I'm sure." The dog then did something no one expected. He approached slowly, placed his paw on the craftsman's hand, and very subtly pushed to the side toward a specific wire. The craftsman was paralyzed. Is he pointing?" The commander swallowed hard. "Cut. What if it's wrong? So we die, but trusting in the only one here who has saved the entire troop so far." The craftsman cut. The box went silent. No crackling, no vibration, no noise. The commander exhaled all his breath at once. "Are you unarmed?" The craftsman looked deep inside and confirmed, "Yes." That was the right thread. And then someone asked the question that echoed for minutes. How did that dog know? But the most important question was yet to come. Because now that the hill was secure, we needed to find out. Because someone had prepared all of that, expecting our troops to arrive. And why did they flee before activating the system? When the bomb disposal expert confirmed that the bomb had been disarmed, no one celebrated. It was as if everyone had caught their breath. The hill was silent, but now it was a different kind of silence, heavier, almost suffocating. The feeling that someone had been there, and had fled seconds before our arrival, kept hammering in the head of every soldier. The commander gave the order to surround the area and search everything. That guy didn't just vanish into thin air. He was here. He planned this. He ran away because he saw us coming, and he might be nearby, she said firmly. The dog, which until then had been glued to the transmitter, slowly raised its head and looked at the thick vegetation on the west side. It sniffed the wind, growled softly, took 2 steps in that direction, and stopped as if analyzing something invisible. It was no longer worried about mines. Now it was something else. It was on someone's trail. The sergeant approached the commander. If the enemy was here, he must have left some kind of trace. The dog clearly sensed it. "Then we'll follow him," the commander replied. The troop lined up as the dog advanced slowly. He sniffed the ground, sniffed branches, raised his head to. The wind repeated the process. He was completely focused, as if each particle of scent said something that only he understood. And it was during one of those moments that he stopped out of nowhere. We thought it was another mine. Everyone froze. But the dog didn't dig. He didn't show fear. He showed alertness. He fixed his gaze on a point between the trees, as if he had seen someone standing there, but nobody could see anything. The commander raised his binoculars, adjusted the lens, and tried to see better. Nothing. Only trees, shadows, and silence. But the puppy didn't move. Its body was completely stiff, its ears pointed forward, its right paw half raised, as if it were about to lunge forward. And then, suddenly, a snap, a dry branch breaking off. It was a long way, but high enough for the soldiers to raise their rifles at the same time. "Move forward!" someone shouted. The commander signaled for a slow advance. The troops spread out in a semicircular formation, covering all angles. The dog led the way without hesitation. It was as if he knew exactly where the danger lay. We advanced a few meters and found the first clear sign, a canteen lying on the ground, still damp inside. A canteen used by enemy troops. "He was just here a little while ago," said the sergeant, touching the metal. "This hasn't even dried yet." A few more steps. Another clue. A knee imprint in the mud, recent and deep. The enemy had not only escaped, he had hidden in that same thicket while we disarmed the bombs, perhaps observing, perhaps waiting for the explosion, perhaps trying to calculate if there was time to return and detonate everything. The commander took a deep breath. That bastard was staring at us the whole time. The dog began to pull to the left, barking softly as if following a trail that grew stronger with each meter. The platoon followed behind, all tense, weapons raised, knowing that any shadow could be a sniper. After about 200 meters into the woods, we found something that completely changed the atmosphere. A small makeshift shelter made of logs and dry leaves. Inside there were food scraps, a torn map, and a pair of German binoculars. The enemy was camped there, monitoring, preparing everything calmly. And the detail that chilled everyone to the bone, the map had exact markings of the trail we were using. He knew that I would climb that hill. It wasn't a generic trap. It was meant for us. The sergeant rubbed his face vigorously, trying to understand. This is taking too long. Too much work. Too much preparation. Was he expecting our platoon exactly? And then, among the leaves, the dog found something no one had seen before. He sniffed, poked with his paw, and pulled out a dark cloth that was half buried in the ground. When the soldier opened the cloth, the revelation came. It was a piece of American uniform, torn, dirty, soaked in dried blood. But it wasn't the uniform of an ordinary soldier. It was Beta, the explorers who... Go ahead to map the terrain. The commander stiffened. The scouts came this way 3 days ago. They should have returned via the northern route. The sergeant replied in a low voice. They returned, but not alive. The atmosphere became heavy in a way that no soldier likes to feel. There lay what remained of the scout who had been captured so that the enemy would understand our route. The enemy knew exactly where we would pass. They knew how long it would take us to arrive. They even knew the formation we would use on the ascent. The trap hadn't been set by chance. It was planned using information extracted from one of our own. The dog sniffed the blood-stained cloth again, and then began to pull it toward another part of the woods, deeper inside. He was following yet another trail. It was no longer the smell of the camp. It was the smell of someone. The enemy, the one responsible for everything. The commander made the decision. Let's go after him. This man knows too much. If he escapes, set this thing up again on another hill. The dog charged forward determinedly, and it was at that moment that the sergeant said something that made everyone look at him. Do you realize that this dog is only following one trail? It's not several enemies, it's one. Did one man do this all by himself? A soldier asked. A man. And he almost destroyed the whole of us. The dog growled again, louder, pointing to a spot further ahead in the woods. It was as if he were saying, "He's there." And it was. But the way we encountered this enemy, and what the dog did when we finally saw it, it was something none of us could forget. The dog led the herd into the woods, as if on a predetermined path. He didn't look back, didn't wait for commands, didn't hesitate for a moment. His expression was that of an animal that had already understood everything. The danger was no longer on the hill, it was in the person who had fled from it, and he wanted to get there before that man did anything else. The forest grew denser with each passing meter. Branches scratched the skin. The ground was slippery, full of roots and loose stones. The air smelled of damp earth and sweat. And yet, the cub advanced with absurd precision. He followed the trail, as if an invisible line connected him to the enemy. The troop could only keep up because the commander had made a simple and direct decision. No one loses sight of this dog. He's our compass. After a few minutes of heavy marching, the dog stopped. Abruptly. Its body tensed and its ears perked up like antennae. It sniffed the air and growled softly. It was the kind of growl that says, "Someone's here." The commander raised his fist, and everyone froze. The silence was so heavy that any stronger breath felt like a gunshot. "He's close," murmured the sergeant. The dog took 2 slow, almost crawling steps to a fallen log. He put his snout underneath, sniffed, and quickly retreated. The commander approached carefully, using his rifle to lift the log. Beneath it, the earth was fresh, recently disturbed. Footprints, large, deep, military boot prints. "He's running," said the sergeant, looking all around. "But he's not very far." The puppy barked once and moved forward, now faster. The troops chased after them, dodging what they could, stumbling over what they couldn't. But the pace was dictated by the animal. It seemed to know that the enemy was also speeding up. It was a silent but desperate race. Every 100 meters the dog slowed. Down, sniffed the ground, adjusted its course and went in another direction. It was as if it were reading an invisible map left by the man's scent. And then, suddenly, he stopped. He didn't freeze from fear. He froze from lack of focus. He stared at a specific point in the woods, a spot between 2 gnarled trees where the vegetation seemed to move slightly. The commander raised his binoculars and looked. For a few seconds he saw nothing, But then a shadow moved, quick, crouching, trying to hide behind a thicker trunk. "Eye contact," the commander warned. The troops spread out in formation. The dog barked loudly and charged forward like a missile. The enemy, realizing he had been discovered, suddenly stood up and began to run. Tall, thin, in camouflaged German uniform, hair tied back with a firm step. He was no amateur. He was no ordinary soldier. He was someone trained to survive alone in the bush. And he was fast. The troops began to chase after them, but the terrain was rough. The enemy dodged as if they had been born there. The dog gained ground, but the man was clever. He changed direction every few meters, used trees for cover, and slipped between logs that prevented the soldiers from passing in a straight line. But there was a problem for him. The dog wasn't a soldier. He didn't need a straight line. He could squeeze through holes, gaps, tiny openings, gaining an advantage every second. The commander shouted, "If he escapes, kill another column. Don't lose him." The chase continued for almost a kilometer, until we reached a clearing, small, open in the middle of the woods. The enemy ran into it and froze instantly. He realized he had put himself in a dead end. The woods closed in completely around him. He couldn't go straight, he couldn't climb, he couldn't go back because the dog was already there. The stray dog appeared at the edge of the clearing, its body low, growling, ready to attack if necessary. The man looked from side to side, breathing rapidly, trying to find a way out. He raised his arm as if to shoot, but he had no weapon. He only had a small portable detonator strapped to his waist, and that's when everything made sense. The enemy had not fled to survive. He had fled to gain distance and try to trigger the explosion from afar. The bomb we disarmed was only part of the plan. He had another way to activate the whole thing, and the detonator on his waist was exactly that. The commander shouted, "He has a second trigger! Shoot! Him in the legs, don't let him press anything." But no one managed to shoot in time. The enemy pulled the detonator, and before the click could happen, the dog lunged forward. He didn't bark, he didn't hesitate, he didn't wait for a command. He simply fired with everything he had, as if he understood that this was the decisive moment. He threw himself against the enemy's arm with such force that the detonator flew spinning through the air and fell into the mud. The man screamed, staggered, backward, and at that moment the sergeant arrived and knocked him to the ground with a swift blow. The enemy still tried to react, but the entire troop surrounded him. He was finished. The commander picked up the detonator from the ground. It was activated. The button had already been pressed, it just hadn't sent a signal because the dog interrupted its movement before the circuit was complete. "If he had pressed that button 2 seconds earlier," said the commander, looking at the animal. 2 seconds. The entire troop looked at the dog as if they were looking at a legitimate soldier. He was dirty, tired, breathing heavily, but still standing, and for the first time on that mission, the commander touched the animal's collar with respect, not haste. "You saved everyone again," he said. The enemy was handcuffed. The sergeant began searching his clothes and found maps, codes, notes, and a letter. But the most important thing was hidden in an inside pocket, a small portable radio, capable of remotely triggering mines. He had planned everything to kill not only our platoon, but any American troops who tried to take that hill. The commander looked at the radio, looked at the dog, and said, "That animal saw that wretch before anyone else." He sensed it. He knew. And while the enemy was being taken into custody, the dog remained in the clearing, sitting and staring at the equipment on the ground, as if it knew that this small object represented the end of the entire operation, and that it was the reason the mission didn't turn into a tragedy. But one thing was still missing, discovering what the enemy was protecting on top of the hill, because nobody sets up a trap of that size just to delay soldiers. There was something there, and the dog once again would be the first to feel it. With the enemy captured and the detonator secure, the troops breathed a few seconds, but the feeling of danger didn't disappear. It was as if something was still hanging in the air waiting to happen. The commander looked at the hill, then at the dog, which remained restless, sniffing the wind and pacing in short circles as if searching for something else. Not a mine, not an enemy, something bigger. The sergeant asked, "Commander, what now?" "Now we're going back to the top," he replied. "If this guy built all this by himself, it's because there was something up there that he wanted to protect." The climb back was tense. Even with the mines deactivated or avoided, no one walked with confidence. The dog walked ahead, not to avoid explosives this time, but as if guiding the platoon to something only he knew. He would stop, look back, as if to say, "Come on, you need to see this." When we reached the top again, the scene was the same. Torn sandbags, remnants of trenches, burnt wood, but something caught our attention. A section of the slope further away had a different covering of earth. The color wasn't the same as the rest. It looked recent, as if someone had dug there and covered it up hastily. The dog ran straight to that spot. He put his snout to the ground and began to dig, but not with the desperation of those digging for landmines. It was different. It was precise, continuous, as if he knew exactly where to dig. The soldiers looked at each other. The entire troop drew closer. After a few seconds of digging, the sound changed. Earth hitting metal. The commander knelt down, brushed aside some of the earth with his hands, and revealed a wide, heavy lid covered in dirt. It was a safe lid, a buried safe. But it wasn't just any safe, it was military, old, reinforced, with a padlock and double lock. It wasn't there by chance. He wasn't just defending his position, the sergeant said. He was defending what's inside here. The soldiers surrounded the place. The commander, with the tip of his rifle, tapped on the lid. A hollow, heavy sound. "Goal scorer, open this." 3 soldiers worked on the latch. They forced it with crowbars, trying to break the padlock. The dog sat beside them, watching as if it were keeping watch. After a few minutes of effort, the lid finally gave way. The commander stood up slowly, and what we saw inside explained why the enemy had done all that. Maps, papers, documents, orders from German officers, complete communication codes, attack coordination, future positions of enemy troops, and at the bottom of the safe, carefully rolled up, was something even more shocking. A map marking all the points where the Germans planned to install mobile artillery bases in the next 2 months. It was information that changed the course of the war. It was information that saved thousands of lives. The sergeant took a deep breath, running a hand over his face. Now it makes sense. He wanted to blow up any troops that arrived here so that no one would find out about it. The commander looked at the safe, then at the dog. If he had succeeded, if that animal hadn't gotten stuck down there, all of this would have been destroyed. Or worse, it would have exploded with us inside. The soldiers began to understand the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just a hill. It wasn't just an ambush. It was a key position the Germans used to conceal entire movement plans. If the enemy had managed to trigger the explosion, the troops would have perished and the documents would have been lost forever, buried or burned. The story of the battle would have been different. But it wasn't, because a dog sensed something. No soldier ever sensed. He stopped at the right second. He blocked the path. He dug at the exact spot. He mapped the mines. He found the main charge. He exposed the detonator. He chased the culprit. He prevented the remote activation. And finally, he found the safe. Without him, none of this would exist. The commander approached the dog, knelt down, and placed his hands on the sides of its head. "You didn't just save us. You saved an entire battalion, maybe even more." The dog licked his hand, tired but alert. He had no idea what he had done. For him it was instinct, survival, duty. But for us it was something else. It was as if there was a sixth sense in that animal, something that went beyond what an ordinary dog would do. A soldier commented, "That's not a mascot. That's a soldier." And another replied, "No, he's the best soldier here." The commander smiled slightly, a rare occurrence in that war. "We're going to put him on file as an official member of the troop, and when this hell is over, he'll go home a hero." The troops began gathering documents to take to command. It was living proof that that dog had changed the course of an entire battle, perhaps even an entire campaign. When we came down from the hill, the sun was already setting. The dog walked ahead, his tail wagging slowly, exhausted but confident. He didn't understand medals, honors, reports, but he understood one thing. He had protected his pack, the soldiers, and that was all that mattered to him. And we knew that we had just witnessed something that no one could explain, but that no one would forget. A dog froze in front of a bombed-out hill, and the reason saved us all. After all that, do you think you would have noticed the danger of that hill before the dog? The biggest lesson from this story is simple. Sometimes the one who saves an entire troop isn't the one carrying a weapon, but the one who sees what nobody else sees. If this story has captivated you this far, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel and comment below which city you're watching from. That helps a lot and motivates me to bring more stories like this.